I'm all about trying to fix your housing problem, but that's pretty radical. Well, there's your loophole right there. Hey guys, it's your average middle-aged American back again with another reaction video. This one is from Spain Reveal, and it is about Spain's 100% property tax. Now, I don't know a lot about a lot, but I know that Spain had a very low property tax. We've done some other videos by this creator, and I do suggest you check out his channel. Got a great channel. And from what my understanding was, I don't know if it was his channel or another channel, but we went through the cost of buying a home in Spain, and the taxes were very, very, very low. In America, we're a country. We have 50 states. Each one of those states is run independently. Within those states are cities. Each one of those cities is run independently. Multiple cities usually make up a county. Those counties are kind of run independently. So it goes federal, state, county, city. Sometimes you have towns, which are generally smaller than cities. I live in a city. It's about the size of a town. If that makes any sense. Anyway. Yeah, property taxes vary dramatically depending on the value of your home and, future construction projects, schools, how fast that area is growing, all kinds of different things. It changes every year. It goes up or down a little bit. Well, let me rephrase that. It never goes down. But it goes up a certain percentage each year. Usually, if you're lucky, when it goes up, your property value is going up at the same time. So you just kind of deal with it. But the videos that I've done on Spain about buying a house, these taxes were either non-existent or extremely low, like less than $1,000 a year. So I have not seen this video. We'll see it together. F jibber jabber. Let's see what this is about.
So the Spanish government has proposed a 100% tax on property purchases by non-EU residents. Yep, it's a big deal. It's a big piece of news. Now, I know you may have heard of this before. You may have heard of this proposal, and that's because some months ago, the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, did in a speech call out this tax and say that they were going to be implementing it. He called it out as a proposal. But something has changed. What has changed is this is no longer a sort of a vague proposal in a politician's speech. This is actually now a draft bill that the Spanish government has put before Congress. So what that means is, one, this is now more serious. It's a more serious proposition. And two, it also means that we have more details. We know what is in the draft bill. We know who this tax would apply to, how much this tax would be, what it's based on. And so I'm getting emails from people, I'm seeing chatter online of people, who are planning to move to Spain or planning to buy a home in Spain who are really worried about this and want to understand it in more detail. So in this video, I want to cover 3 different points, 3 different areas. First, I want to give you the details on what's actually in the draft bill, who this tax would apply to, who it won't apply to, and how much this tax would be, like what this 100% tax is based on, 100% of what. 2, I want to give you some expert perspective from a leading Spanish tax and property lawyer. And 3, I want to give you my perspective on this tax and what it might mean if you're planning to move to Spain and planning to buy a home in Spain. If you don't know me, my name is James Blick. I'm the founder of Spain Revealed. I've lived in Spain for 14 years. I've built 2 businesses here. I have a wonderful family. And I help people move to Spain the right way, which I do with a combination of step-by-step guidance, expert advice, and community support. I'm actually not in Spain right now. I'm in New Zealand visiting family. You can tell from the background behind me. But let's get into this video because I really want to help you first understand what is in this proposed bill, who it would apply to, who it wouldn't apply to, and how much you would have to pay if you did get hit with this tax. All right, let's get.
All right, so this makes a lot of sense to me. I've been, even though it's not in my best interest, I've been a supporter for taxing people that are not Spaniards, or I guess in this case, not from the EU, because it isn't economically fair for people to be forced out of decent housing because their economic level isn't the same as other countries. And that doesn't even mean poverty versus wealth or any of that, just the level. I'll give you an example. The last time I checked, the median household in America was more than twice as high as it is in Spain. Now, that doesn't mean that we make twice as much money. Well, it does mean that, but it doesn't mean that our our wealth is twice as much. It means that that's just our income level. But on the same side of that, the cost of living may be higher. So just because you make twice as much doesn't mean you have twice as much after you pay all your bills. So for an American to travel to Spain, it's like you're getting everything half price, basically. You can spend, depending on what city you're in America, you could spend $1 million on a house, and that same house, depending on what city in Spain, could be two or three or $400,000. So the ratios are off. It's not as much. It's not about America's rich and Spain is poor or anything like that. It's about the ratio. Same thing with like Switzerland. If you move from Texas to Switzerland, there's a ginormous difference in price. It's all going to depend on what's going on. So if you're coming from Germany or Switzerland or Canada or America and you go to Spain, you can buy more than the average person. Even if you're average in your country, you'll buy quite a bit more than the average Spaniard can buy. There's got to be a way to level that out. And this looks like a proposal to try to do that. Now, obviously, we'll get into the details. I'm not even against it. Yeah, I would love to go buy an apartment in Spain for 150 or $200,000 and have a place to go 3 or 4 or 5 months a year in retirement or whatever. That'd be wonderful. But I wouldn't want to do that if it means that somebody else can't get an apartment because they have a normal job just like I do. So yeah, it's just the balance. That's the fine line you gotta figure out. What do you guys think about your government? I'm getting a lot of complaints. A lot of my viewers are not happy with the Spanish government right now. They love their country, but they don't love their government right now. How do you feel? Let me know.
Kickoff. Okay, so what is the proposal? What are the details of this draft bill? Well, first of all, what is it called? It's called the State Supplementary Tax on the Transfer of Real Estate to Non-EU Residents. A real mouthful. And it's a national tax that would apply to the purchase of resale residential property to individuals who are A, not EU citizens, and B, not Spanish tax residents at the time of the purchase. It does not apply to the purchase of newly built properties, say from developers, if you're buying off the plans, etc., or buying new.
Well, there's your loophole right there. Huh.
Properties off developers doesn't apply in that case, doesn't apply to transactions between companies. And again, to be really clear, it doesn't apply to EU citizens. I'll explain a little bit why. And it doesn't apply to a foreign purchaser of real estate in Spain who.
Okay, so I have a company. I own a company. Not a big company. It's a tiny little company. But my company could just buy a house in Spain. Companies buy homes all the time. Matter of fact, a lot of my clients, every home they have is its own company. Long story, but basically it's for taxes. That way all the expenses that are applied towards that company, i.e., that house or property, are deductions for taxes, for tax purposes. Big companies like Disney or Intel or Apple or whatever, they have homes all over the world. Their executives can go there for vacation or whatever. So that's your loophole. You either have to have a company or you just got to buy something new. Wow, that seems simple enough.
Is a tax resident at the time of the purchase. So clearly this law is targeting, private non-EU individuals who are looking to buy, say, a holiday home in Spain, a second property in Spain.
Wow, look at that. It's got a very odd beauty to it. I mean, it's as congested as all get out, but it's pretty for some reason.
A holiday home in Spain, a second property in Spain, perhaps an investment property in Spain. That is who this is targeting. And you might ask, okay, well, why? What is all this about? Well, as I've mentioned on this channel before, there is, and as you may have read, there's a housing crisis in Spain. And so this is another of the Spanish government's kind of myriad of proposals to deal with this housing crisis, obviously to reduce, the amount of properties that are going to people that effectively don't live here and aren't living a life here. And you might be wondering, why does it not apply to EU residents? Well, there's a rule within the EU that EU countries have to abide by, which is the free movement of capital. Within the EU, there needs to be a free movement of money, of wealth, of property. A government in the EU can't limit that. So I also want to be...
See, I understand what you guys did. I mean, I understand as much as any other average American, but in some ways you're shooting yourself in the foot. Now, I understand, there's pros and cons to everything, but I mean, Germany's a perfect example. I mean, Germany makes a lot more money in dollars, euros, whatever, than Spain, than the average person in Spain. So somebody in Germany can retire to Spain and not pay any of these taxes, and they could have made 2 or 3 times more than the exact same profession would have in Spain, right? Am I wrong about that, or is that accurate? Or even a vacation home, right? Because it just says you have to be a resident of the EU. Doesn't say you have to even live in Spain. A lot of loopholes.
Clear who this doesn't apply to. You might be thinking, okay, I'm moving to Spain from the US, Australia, and I want to buy a home. So it sounds like, I don't fit those categories. Potentially this may apply to me. Just to be clear. So if you are here and you've been here for a few years, you're a tax resident in Spain, you're living on your non-lucrative visa, you're a digital nomad visa, whatever it is, then, and you buy a resale residential property, this is not going to apply to you. But what it is going to catch is people who are looking at moving to Spain. Say you're looking at moving to Spain next year and you want to buy a property now in advance of your move. And your plan is to live in that home. But if you're buying it now, you're not yet a tax resident of Spain. Say, again, you're coming from a non-EU country. You're not yet a tax resident in Spain, so it would apply to you. Or, for example, you move to Spain, again, maybe on a non-lucrative visa, digital nomad visa, and you purchase a home in the initial months of your move to Spain. You're not yet a tax resident. You haven't been here enough time to convert into a Spanish tax resident. And so this law, this tax would apply to you. Okay, so that's who it would and wouldn't apply to. But what about the actual amount of this tax? The draft bill proposes or has in it a tax rate that is 100% of the tax base. Now, this tax base is the higher of 2 possible figures. The first would be the value of the property on Spain's property register, or 2, it would be the value of the property as per the purchase price, which is usually...
That's bad. I'm not going to tell you how to run your government, but that's bad. In our world, it's the lower, because the government could say your house is worth $2 million, but the free market says your house is worth $500,000 and you're being taxed on the 2 million. That's not right. In our world, our tax to value is lower than our market value. So you can argue the tax rate, but you can't argue the tax amount. You can't argue what it's being taxed on. Where I live, it's probably 75%. I look up a lot of things. I actually took real estate in college and was going to be a realtor and the whole long story. But so I look up a lot of stuff on the tax rolls. All that stuff's public where I live. So I can look up the house next door, how much they bought it for, what they pay in taxes, the owners before them, et cetera, home improvements that required a permit, all that stuff's on the internet. And I've never seen someone taxed at a higher rate than their house was actually worth. Yeah, that's a big mistake. That right there is a problem. That's an easy way to have government overreach, because now you're arguing what your house is really worth, and it doesn't matter because it's the higher of the two. So, yeah, that's bad. That's not good.
Be higher. That second amount, the purchase price, is usually higher than the property registry valuation. So the tax would be 100% of the higher of those two amounts. Now, there is a deduction for any regional transfer tax that you have to pay when you purchase or resale property in Spain. Each region puts a percentage tax that you have to pay, which is effectively a transfer tax that you have to pay on, when you purchase that property. But obviously, it's a lot smaller than what this national tax is proposing. So in the end, it's quite likely that the final tax would be the full value of the property, which really means it's doubling potentially the purchase price of the property. So it all sounds pretty dramatic, right? Well,
It's pretty radical. I'm all about trying to fix your housing problem, but that's pretty radical. You went from, I'm assuming, 0 or 1 or 2 or 3%, something very small, to 100%. Maybe you start off at 20%, 25%. See how that goes for a few years, and then jump it to 30, 40%. Or put it in the bill that it starts off at 20%, or starts at 20%, goes up 10% for the next 9 years. That way that can be revoked or whatever. Just to say 100%, bam. It's going to catch a lot of people in a real pinch, especially if they're like in negotiations, or depending on when they're moving, all that stuff. That's 100% is a big whap. I mean, that's a monster. And maybe you have an exclusion of a certain amount. I mean, let's get real. Anybody who's looking for an apartment, who works at a restaurant as a waiter, is probably not going to buy a $2 million house, right? So do you really need to make a $2 million house a $4 million house? And here's the other problem. What about all the people who are trying to sell their houses? And I bet you, I don't know, we'll see if anybody even thought of this. But you have a market full of homeowners, and they're trying to sell their house. And now the housing market's going to crash, because people don't care how much the house is, or how much the land is, or anything else. All they care about is how much they're paying. So if you double the price on everything, that could literally crash the market, where the house that was 500,000 is now going to be worth 300,000, because the customer is going to pay 600,000. Most people are going to buy a $500,000 house aren't going to buy a $1 million house and get the same house. So let's say they understand the new law and blah blah blah, and they pay 100 grand more. Well, 300 of that's going to the government. Only 300 of it's going to the homeowner. Yeah, this it's a little radical. Not a little radical. It's very radical.
Wanted to reach out and get some legal and expert perspective on this, to give you another perspective that goes beyond just what's, in the actual draft bill itself. So I reached out to Federico Gonzalez. He's a leading Spanish tax and property lawyer. He's also a featured expert in my Move to Spain masterclass. And I said, Federico, how should people be thinking about this? First of all, when we spoke, he talked about the fact that, this is just still a draft bill at this stage. This is not law yet. yeah, it's more than a proposal in a speech, but there's no guarantee that this will actually become law. The Spanish government right now is kind of hanging on by tenterhooks, and there's no guarantee that they have the political clout, the political power right now to get a bill like this through, which would clearly have a lot of opposition from the opposition parties. Now, the second point Federico said is that even if this were to become a law, it is very likely that it would face serious and stiff legal challenges. The first of those could be that the law is declared unconstitutional in Spain. That's because the law could be considered confiscatory, or the tax could be considered confiscatory, which is a legal term that means that it unfairly strips people of their property and wealth. Second, it could face challenges at the EU level. It could violate EU law. Now, that's because that free movement of capital that I mentioned earlier, court rulings, Federico told me, have shown or have declared that the free movement of capital rule and principle also applies to non-EU citizens. So in short, it's very possible this draft bill never becomes law. And even if it does become law, as I say, it would face serious legal challenges that may strike it down and remove it from the rule books. Okay, so what are my thoughts on this draft bill and this proposed tax? Well, there's four things that I want to cover here. And the first is that it seems to me that from the government's perspective, this draft bill is more likely political than practical. I suspect the government knows the law, if it were to become law, would be unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. So it seems the intention, or at least one key intention here, is to cool the market. I see people saying, well, I'm not going to buy in Spain anymore. So it may mean that prices actually do drop. Now, the second thing I want to say is on the communication side. You know, what really frustrates me is the way that this is being communicated, or the lack of communication from the Spanish government about this draft bill. I get emails and I see people in the community talking about this, really concerned if it's going to apply to them and how it's going to impact their plan of moving to Spain. By not being clear about this, I would say, and not really having a communication plan at the same time as proposing this tax, the government risks kind of lumping all foreign buyers and all foreigners together in this. You know, there are people who want to move to Spain and contribute to the Spanish economy and to communities here, and they're worried if this applies to them. So if the government is going to drop a bombshell like this, it really needs to communicate clearly who this applies to and who this doesn't apply to. And third, there's an interesting economic reality here that some coastal areas of Spain actually survive, some towns survive on foreign seasonal homeowners. If this is going to really impact that market, then the government needs to think about this and have a plan for these municipalities that really rely on that model. And I think the last thing, the fourth thing I want to say, just keep in mind and remember that if you are planning to move to Spain to set up a life here, become a tax resident on the non-lucrative visa or digital nomad visa, then this proposed tax would not apply to you. But as I said earlier, I am concerned for those people who are planning to move here and set up a life here, but are looking to purchase a property in advance of that move or in the early days of that move. Now, again, most people.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't move to another country until I spent a lot of time in that country. And I might find it easier to buy a two or three or $400,000 investment that, I can go anytime I want and stay for a few weeks and have my friends and family use it whenever they want. Or maybe I go into a partnership with a couple of friends and we all put in 100,000 and buy a place. And there's a big difference between buying a house and moving. So yeah, I mean, I would think most people would want to at least dip their toe in the water before they just jump in. Now, granted, you could rent a place, but you find the right deal and all that. It's an interesting situation. And I guess the proposal would assume that the tax is up front, right? So if you've got $250,000 saved up and you planned on buying a $500,000 house, you'd be at a mortgage for the other 250, or that's dependent on the sale of your property in your country or whatever. And the government says, well, we want our money up front. Well, that just changes the whole world. But it should almost be more of an ownership tax, like a yearly fee or something like that. You know, let's say it's 5% of your house every year, like regular property tax. So the same rules apply if you're from America or Canada or New Zealand or whatever. Then let's say you have an impact of 10% just to get some money into the government, and then you pay 5% a year forever. That makes sense. That's property tax. That's what we have in America. You own a piece of property in America, you're paying property tax every year. You have multiple homes, you're paying multiple property taxes. And it doesn't matter if you live in them or not live in them or anything else. You're still getting billed. If you're in Los Angeles, California, you're paying a lot more property tax than if you're living in Biloxi, Mississippi. Yeah, I mean, you can't do it as an upfront tax because it's actually going to make it worse. It's actually going to tilt the system to only the rich. So now you're just going to have these rich people like just taking over entire cities. You know what I mean? Because if the average middle-aged American can't buy there, now you're going to have to be a multi-billionaire, not billionaire, a multi-millionaire to even think about buying anything. Now that's completely offset. You're going to have literally the rich and the non-rich. I mean, I don't want to say poor, but there's like 600 billionaires in America. So there's thousands of people in America worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, imagine if 10,000 of those people bought in Spain. You're talking about driving the market completely whacked. I mean, that would just be a whole different world because the people that can afford to pay the tax are the kind of the people you're trying to keep out. So it's almost like a two-edged sword. It doesn't work. It's just not right. You just need to do a regular property tax, just like America. We just have a yearly property tax. You buy a more expensive house, you pay more property tax. If it's in the same area. Buy a less expensive house, you pay less, and that's every year.
People, I find, rightly rent first to really make sure the move to Spain is right for them and the move to a specific community is right for them before they buy. But that's not always the best fit for people. So maybe there, in these cases, could be in other countries, there's a rebate you can get if you then do become a resident within a certain amount of time. But look, who's going to want to spend another 300,000 euros on a tax just to get it rebated in a year's time? People don't have that kind of cash. So it's going to negatively affect those people who are looking to move to Spain and set up a life here and contribute to the Spanish economy and Spanish communities. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Let us know down below what you think about this. I'd love to have a read in the comments. We'll see you in Spain. As I say, I'm in New Zealand right now, and I look forward to reading your thoughts. Okay, ciao.
Well, there you go, guys. What do you guys think? I think it's a good idea, and I think it's really poor execution. I think you need a property tax, of just a yearly property tax. And what we do here is it's a percentage of what your property's worth, and it's not a big percentage usually. So I pay less than 1% a year in property tax. And then I pay a little less than 1% in insurance. Let's say $1 million house would be, we'll call it 15,000 a year in between insurance and property tax. And then you get a deduction. So if you actually live there, you'll get a deduction off of that. And it's not based on what your house is worth to the penny. It's based on probably 75%, maybe 50% if you've done a lot of home improvements and they haven't rolled over to the next year yet, that kind of thing. It really varies a lot. But then if you're in a very modest home, let's say your house is $200,000 or $300,000 US, your property taxes might be $1,500 a year. Your insurance maybe $1,500 a year, maybe $2,000, something like that. You may be paying $3,000 or $4,000 for a $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 home. That's a big difference between buying a $300,000 home and paying $300,000 tax bill. And then it could go up a little bit. You know, say you're paying $4,000 a year now. Next year you may pay $4,100 or $4,200. The year after that, $4,300, $4,400, $4,500. The year after that, $4,600 or $4,700. But in the meantime, your house went from being worth $300,000 or $400,000 to $325,000 to $425,000, or $350,000 to $450,000. So it's all a ratio. That makes a lot more sense to me. Let me know what you guys think. Enough jibber jabber. I appreciate all of you guys. I will see you on the next one. Take care. Thanks for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see other videos similar to this one on the same country, click here. If you'd like to see some videos on some other countries in Europe, click there. Want to see some of the most beautiful castles and cathedrals in the world? They're over here. Want to check out the United States? We're down here. I appreciate you, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.